the Watergate building in Washington, this is Hotline TV. Now here are Hotline editors Amy Walter and John Mercurio.
Welcome to Hotline TV. I'm Amy Walter.
And I'm John Mercurio. Well, Sam Brownback has taken the road back to Kansas. According to news reports, he's expected to drop his bid to seek the Republican nomination tomorrow in Topeka, Kansas. Amy Walter, do you think Brownback is the first in a wave of second and third tier candidates who are going to be dropping out in the coming days and weeks? Or is this just sort of exclusive to Brownback and his third quarter fundraising performance?
Well, I think that answers a lot of that question, which is there were a number of people who came out of the third quarter with fundraising totals that weren't what they wanted or expected to see. Huckabee obviously has pretty low numbers too, but nobody looked quite as bleak as Sam Brownback. I mean, he didn't even have $100,000 in the bank. So to continue for the next, what do we have, 77 more days before we get to Iowa, even on a real shoestring budget, $85,000 isn't going to take you very far.
It had a lot to do with money, but if you go back to the beginning of this campaign, I, for one, thought that Brownback looked like sort of the quintessential classic traditional conservative Republican who's even from Kansas, almost in sort of the Bob Dole mode from 1996, who would have performed well in maybe a presidential campaign a generation ago, where you had a Republican Party that sort of gravitated towards the sort of conservative standard bearer, who's articulate and who can speak and who has a relatively large experience both in national and international policy. He couldn't compete with this sort of top tier, these incredible, not necessarily rock stars on the Republican side, but people who were able to sort of capitalize on the fundraising
Well, and he
circuit.
lost it even to Huckabee. I mean, you know what? It wasn't just the Ames straw poll where he lost his status as the sort of dark horse or social conservative mantle, but the fact that Huckabee outshone him during all the debates and just had the personality that was much more engaging and intriguing, even though Brownback's record and work on a whole bunch of issues gave him a pretty complex story. I mean, he wasn't a sort of cookie cutter conservative in that way. I also find it interesting, though, that it's been clear from the very beginning that if you were a social conservative candidate hoping that either one of the other candidates was going to implode, one of the many other candidates was going to implode, or that eventually the base would turn to you once they were dispirited or disappointed with front-running Romney, Giuliani, et cetera, it's just never going to happen. I mean, we have this Voters' Values Conference. Everybody's still talking about the fact that they can't find a consensus candidate. They might have a third party. They're so upset about the fact they can't find somebody who's conservative enough. But that's not really the issue, as we've known all along. They want somebody who can beat Hillary, period. And they were never going to be able to coalesce around a candidate simply on the issues.
The one place where his departure, I think, will have a ripple effect to some extent. I think it'll have an impact. Is going to be in Iowa. He was actually running a relatively serious campaign in Iowa. You talk to people on the ground. He had the organization, and that organization is now going to be, to a large extent, really poached upon by people like Huckabee. I think, to some extent, by people like Ron Paul. To help build what at this point had been pretty non-existent campaigns on their part. And it'll really, I think, raise the question that's being asked these days, which is whether anybody on the Republican side is even running in Iowa, or if they're sort of forfeiting the state to Romney.
Well, this is where Romney, it feels very, very much like the straw poll, right? Where if everybody cedes the state, except for people like Huckabee, and then Huckabee does exceptionally well, or there's a conservative, then that gets any bump that Romney wanted from Iowa going into New Hampshire off the table. So this is actually a big risk for Romney more than anybody else.
But just like Brownback's campaign, we're ready to call it quits for today. But don't forget to join us tomorrow when we'll have a special tribute to Sam Brownback and his departure. But we'll see you next time right here on Hotline TV.
Is that as good as yours? Almost.